Hello, it's John's D&D vlog, episode number 33. Today I'm going to start talking about Chainmail. Last week I talked about outdoor survival. This week I'm talking about Chainmail. So that episode and this one, this is all the pre-D&D stuff, right? I'm primarily a first and second edition guy. I don't know a lot about older editions, and I don't know much about newer editions either. I kind of live just in that one little sliver of D&D history. When I first started making this vlog, I decided I was going to have my blog be about all of D&D, right? Not just the old stuff, not just the new stuff, not just the stuff I'm comfortable with, but I was going to try to show everything that mattered, right? I was hoping it would become the sort of thing that people could use as a sort of reference. You know, if they want to find out about a thing, they can look at my videos and learn about stuff quickly. So I'm not planning on making a lot of videos, but I'm trying to make the videos that I do make valuable. Right? And like I said, I don't know this stuff terribly well, but I'm learning. And I'm willing to show people things that when I look on the internet, I don't see other people talking about this. So I kind of feel like I'm taking advantage of a heretofore neglected area. So I'm going to talk about Chainmail probably for like the next 3 episodes. I've been looking through it. So like Chainmail, right? Rules for medieval miniatures. So I'm probably going to be talking about this book over like the next 3 episodes. It's a thin book, but there's a lot in it, and it's actually from my personal experience, it's been kind of hard to understand. It felt to me like somebody gave you a booklet with all the assembly instructions for an entire room full of furniture from like IKEA or something, right? But then they took each individual instruction and clipped it out into separate little sheets of paper, and then they mixed them all up and they threw them back in the booklet in whatever order randomly it just happened to show up in. It's a little hard to understand. What I also noticed was that they didn't include a lot of stuff that people who don't know anything about medieval miniatures or wargaming in general would like to know about. So I'll try to include some of that information as well. Back here up on the table right now are all the books that were considered to be official D&D back in the mid-70s. I covered outdoor survival last episode. I didn't understand exactly how outdoor survival and Chainmail fit into the entire Dungeons and Dragons game. I mean, how were they used? And I figured that out a little bit better since I've been playing around with them and talking to people on the net about it. Here, I'll show you. So anyway, outdoor survival and Chainmail, how they actually got used in the old games. When you look at maps from old modules, like here on Keep on the Borderlands and from Isle of Dread, there's always going to be 2 sorts of different maps, right? You've got the map where the traveling occurs, but then if you look inside the module, you usually find a map where the fighting occurs, right? And then same thing goes with Isle of Dread. You've got where the map where the traveling occurs, and then inside you've got the map where fighting occurs, right? So that means outdoor survival, right? This particular map up here that came from outdoor survival, that would be the map where the traveling would occur. But then, for where the fighting occurs, you would just get yourself a table like this, right? And you would get out your miniatures, and then that's the map where the fighting would occur. So I'm going to start explaining Chainmail now, but I thought what would be good, first of all, before I started explaining it, would be to explain what wargaming is at all. I mean, there's a whole bunch of gamers out there, me included, who don't know much about wargaming at all. There's a term that floats around in the culture called grognard. It comes from French, and it means a very, very, very old soldier. It's a term that players will call the guys who've been in the hobby for like 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, if you've been doing it for a really long time, an amazing long amount of time, other players will call you that, grognard. And the D&D players, hats off to you, but these guys are the grognards. It's not us. I mean, wargaming itself has been around for a very long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. So anyway, I found a few of these pictures on the net when I searched for Minneapolis and wargaming. And in this last picture here, I thought it was kind of interesting. The blurb underneath says that guy in the circle there, that's David Arneson from St. Paul. So if that's him, I mean, that's the grandpapa of Dungeons and Dragons, just as much as Gary Gygax was. So I'm going to spend some time talking about wargaming, explain it to you so you can understand it a little bit better. So, to ease us into the whole new idea of wargaming, I was going to talk about a few other games first, stuff that we know really well, and then I'll slowly get us into the whole idea of thinking about wargaming, because it's a very different thing than role-playing games. Even though D&D came from wargaming, it's a very different thing than it. A few years back, a friend of mine gave me a bunch of these little figures. It's Pekochans. They use them for it's a character for a chocolate company here in Japan. She gave me a ton of them, and I didn't know what else to do with them, so I made them into a chess set. So first, we're going to talk about chess a little bit. So if you think about chess in terms that a Dungeons and Dragons player might understand better, right? Movement isn't done in inches. Instead, it's done by these units on the board. So if you got a big board or a little board, it doesn't matter. It's got nothing to do with inches. It's got everything to do with these units of measurement. When a given character on the board is in range of being shot, it's dead. That's all there is to it. You don't have to roll to see if you hit, and you don't have to keep track of damage. It's just dead. Or I guess you could say captured if you want to use that term instead. So it's an extremely simple way of dealing with combat. If you can touch it, it's yours, it's dead, you got it, right? And movement is defined instead of inches by some pre-configured pattern specific to each of the pieces. And when it comes to combat and movement, so like in Dungeons and Dragons, movement and combat are two completely separate entities that are calculated independently of one another, right? In chess, movement and combat are exactly the same thing, right? If you can move there, you can take the piece. That's chess, right? So here's another war game that maybe a lot of you are familiar with. So I'll explain it, and maybe it'll help acclimatize you to the whole idea of wargaming. It's Risk. It's been ending friendships since 1957. It's an amazingly good way to get rid of a few friends if you feel like getting rid of a few. So anyway, in this game, it's a little bit more abstracted. In chess, movement and combat are one and the same. But in Risk, it's a little bit different, right? So I'm going to attack from the Middle East. I'm going to attack India, right? So I can't just move there. In chess, I would just be able to move there. If I could potentially move there, then I would automatically get it. But in Risk, it's a little bit different, right? So in Risk, they say you can only attack with as many armies as you have on a spot, except for one, right? So the attacker, right? So I have to leave this one guy there, but I can attack with these two. And the defender, he can defend with both of his armies if he wants to. Okay? So that means I've got 2 attacking armies versus 2 defending armies. So in order to actually take over that spot, I actually have to roll to see if I hit, which is slightly more D&D-ish. So I'll roll these. Whoa. Sorry, North Africa. Okay, so my attacker got a 6 and a 5. Can you see that? My attacker rolled a 6 and a 5. And my defender rolled a couple of 2s. So in Risk, you compare the highest die rolls of the one with the highest die rolls of the next. So a 6 beats a 2. So therefore India loses 1. And a 5 beats a 2. Therefore India loses the other. And then if I win, if I roll successfully, I can move my armies in. Okay? So it's a slightly little bit closer to reality. Okay? Combat and movement aren't one and the same. It is divided up a little bit, right? But just like chess, you don't take into consideration the weather, you don't take into consideration morale. There's a whole bunch of stuff you don't take into consideration. You don't take into consideration the type of troop. You just roll a die, and they consider all the armies to be equally the same. Okay, so let's compare it to one more game before I actually start talking about Chainmail. This is Dungeon, and you might want to think about this as a step away from wargaming and towards role-playing games. Because like in chess and Risk, right, all of those pieces on the board actually represent huge numbers of armies, right? So as a rule, like in chess, you've got one king and one queen, of course, but as a rule, a king will have more than 8 pawns in his army. He'll have thousands, right? So most of the units on a chessboard represent hundreds, if not thousands, or even tens of thousands of people, right? And in Risk, it's the same thing. Each one of those individual units does not represent one guy walking around with a rifle. It's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, or even tens of thousands of guys. This was David Arneson's big, huge contribution to role-playing games. One day when he was playing a game, instead of putting out a figure that represented an army, he put out a figure that represented an individual person who was walking around in some kind of a world, right? And David Magari, the guy who made this game, was a player in Blackmore, David Arneson's campaign. And so somehow the idea got shared between the two, and David Magari made this game where each of these individual men is an actual person walking around the board. And once again, combat and movement have been separated from one another. Combat and movement aren't exactly the same thing like it is in chess. In here, everybody moves 5 spaces, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they can go in and encounter a different sort of monster, and then gain treasure. So it's one step away from wargaming and closer to the role-playing games that we play nowadays. And all of the combat is done with 6-sided dice, which was extremely common back then. So, assuming that my guy is an elf, I need to roll a 5 or better to take out a giant lizard. I don't know if you can read that. So I roll my 2 dice, and I got a 9. So I killed the monster, and I get the treasure, which happens to be a sack of gold worth 250 gold pieces. My own character never gets stronger. Unlike D&D, my own character never really gets any stronger. So it's a step between like Risk and Dungeons and Dragons. You're working with an individual, but the individuals never get any stronger. But just like chess and just like Risk, here you don't keep track of the weather, you don't keep track of morale, but they do assume that each of these players can be of a different quality of player. I mean, because you've got the elves who have the hardest time killing anything, but then you've also got the superheroes who have a much better, easier time of it, and then the wizards, right? So you can kind of see the difference, the progression in how wargaming moved from straightforward wargaming to the Dungeons and Dragons we have now. What you may have noticed from the pictures you've seen so far of wargaming is, as opposed to role-playing games in Dungeons and Dragons where one miniature equals one person, one dragon, one soldier, whatever, in wargaming, one miniature is actually like a block of many individual soldiers, right? So you'll have like a block of 4 soldiers or a block of 10 or 12 or 20 or 30 soldiers, right? So I don't have access to those kinds of miniatures, so I'm going to have to compensate for that. And I'll make up stuff that I can use on my own, and I'll show you what I did. So instead of using those big expensive miniatures, I just printed up a bunch of these counters, and I laminated them, and I'll just put them out on the table instead. But these are the 6 main units of soldier that you'll be able to use in Chainmail. There's others, I'll talk about them a little bit later on, but for now it's just these 6. It's light foot soldiers, heavy foot soldiers, armored foot soldiers, but then you've also got the light horsemen, the medium horsemen, and the heavy horsemen. So this is what a simple sample combat's going to look like, right? I'm going to do this as simply as possible. I'm going to ignore a ton of rules. This is the second time I actually posted this video, right? The first time I did it, I guess I made a mistake. I was rolling initiative for each side to see who would go first. And I don't think that's the way it happens in Chainmail. It's not actually mentioned anywhere specifically, but I believe all combat occurs simultaneously, which means both sides of the battle roll their dice at the same time. Also, I've got 2 ranks of light foot up here, right? That's the wimpiest soldier. They're going to be going against 3 heavy horse. That's the strongest of the troops. So, because I've got 2 ranks of troops fighting, supposedly, according to the rules of Chainmail and some guy on the internet who was complaining about me, the guys in the back wouldn't actually get to attack unless they're wielding some kind of a really long spear, like a pike or something. So, yes, for this example, they're wielding pikes. That way both can fight at the same time. So I'm just going to go through a very, very simple basic combat, and we'll see how it goes. According to page 40, right, of your book, the heavy horse get 4 dice per man when they're going up against Lightfoot. And then the opposite is true with Lightfoot. The Lightfoot only get 1 dice per 4 men when they're going up against Heavy Horse. The Heavy Horse, if they roll a 5 or a 6, it's a kill. And the Lightfoot, if they roll a 6, not a 5 or a 6, just a 6, then they kill. Let's see what happens. Okay, round 1. And everyone's going to roll their dice all at the same time. Right? Okay, so what I've got here is that the Heavy Horse got 2 6s and 2 5s. So that means 2 of the Lightfoot, I'm sorry, 4 of the Lightfoot are going to be gone. Right? And then Lightfoot rolled no 6s, so none of the Heavy Horse disappear this time. So they're going to get to roll 12 dice again this next round, but the Lightfoot only get to roll 4, right? 16 guys, and they get 1 die per 4 guys, so that means they only get to roll 4 dice, right? So now it's going to be round 2, and I'm going to roll all the dice again simultaneously. So the Heavy Horse, they rolled 3 6s and 2 5s, so that means that I get to get rid of 5 of these guys. And the Lightfoot, they didn't roll any 6s at all, so the Heavy Horse are unaffected. What I neglected to do this time was to roll for morale, and morale means whether or not a person runs if they're in the face of another troop, right? So like I said, I'm making this super simple, and I'll go over morale in the next episode, but for now, just realize I'm skipping over stuff, right? So now, from now on, the Lightfoot are only going to get to roll 2 dice, right? They get 1 die per 4 men, and they've got 11 guys there, so they only get 2 dice, while the Heavy Horse still get 12. Round 3. The Heavy Horse rolled 1 6, and the Lightfoot again didn't roll enough to kill any of the Heavy Horse. Round 4. Okay, this time the Heavy Horse rolled 1 6 and 1 5, so 2 more of these guys are gone. And the Lightfoot didn't roll any 6s, so the Heavy Horse are unaffected. Next round. I rolled 2 6s. So from now on, the Lightfoot only get to roll 1 die. Right? This time the Lightfoot managed to roll 1 6, so one of the Heavy Horse goes away. But the Heavy Horse got 3 6s and 1 5. So that means 4 of these guys go away. The Lightfoot no longer has enough men in order to be able to affect the Heavy Horse, and the battle's over. So that was boring, sorry, but in order to see how combat is done in Chainmail, you just need to see a good example of it. But Chainmail and wargaming in general is about more than just the dice rolling, right? It's about very detailed simulations of battles and the implementation of your own strategies within those battles, right? If you search on YouTube for wargaming, you'll find a lot of examples to look at. The one I found, the one that I'm showing here, was really interesting to me. It was a 2-day-long simulation of Gettysburg, right? So these guys, they played for 8 hours straight on one day, and then they came back the next day and played some more until the battle finally ended about lunchtime, I think is what they said. That was like 12 hours of wargaming straight, right? These guys actually celebrated the anniversary of Gettysburg. That's the kind of guys these guys are, right? RPGs are about an individual character. You focus on the guy. You don't just focus on what happens to him during the battle. You focus on what happens before, what happens after. But in wargaming, it's just the fights. It's just the battles, you know. So in this way, you could consider Chainmail and wargaming in general to be a lot like chess or Risk. It's just about the battle. Earlier in this vlog, I said that Dave Arneson's big contribution to role-playing games was to put a miniature on the table, have one player control just that one miniature. I should actually state that a little more clearly. The second that he did that, the second that he put one miniature on the table and had one player control it, that was the very instant in which role-playing games came into being. In that one instant, he invented it all, because as soon as one player became in charge of just one character, the player became very concerned about minute details concerning that one little character on the board. They cared about the preparation beforehand. They cared about what the results of the battle were afterwards. It became more. It became about more than just the battles. So I don't know how well you can see my table here. I drew out a diagram of a battle scene that might. This would be a better example of wargaming, right? And honestly speaking, I'm such a newbie at this, I don't really have the business talking about any of this stuff at all, but I'm doing this so that the average RPGer can understand a little bit better where D&D came from. What I've learned so far is that, so like if you look at the beginning of Men in Magic, and they ask for they give you a list of the stuff you'll need to use, it says like 1 20-sider, 1 12-sider, 1 10-sider, and then it says 4 to 20 pairs of 6-sided dice, right? And I was always curious about why would you need 46-sided dice? If you're using Chainmail, you'll actually need a ton of dice from time to time, because you've got a whole bunch of dice rolling to do. What I've also learned is that I need a way to distinguish my guys, the guys that are fighting on one team and the guys who are fighting on the other. So anyway, I'm new to this. I made all the counters the same color. If I was going to do it different, if I was going to do it better, I'd make them different colors. Anyway, the thing about wargaming is each side of a given battle has a given objective. So like in this particular setup, right, I've got all these medium horse and heavy horse and light horse, and they're going to be attacking this castle. And it's the people inside the castle's job to defend it. So if the defenders can protect their castle, then they win. But if the attackers can, successfully assail it, then they win, right? So that's the sort of setup that would happen a lot in wargaming, right? It's not at all about what happens before and after the battle. It's just about the battle. So like a big game of chess, like I said. That's the page I used from Chainmail to. That was probably the most helpful page of the entire book for figuring out this stuff. So anyway, I was going to do this in 3 different parts. Today was episode 1. I was going to do 2 other parts. There's a lot in this book, right? And I got you acclimatized to the whole idea of this stuff today, and then next time I was going to try to go in a little bit more into detail on movement and the rest of it. It's a very complex thing. TSR, Tactical Study Rules. This is what these guys used to do all the time before somebody finally stumbled on D&D. This is what they did all the time, right? Wargaming. So, I think that's all I'm going to cover this time. I'm sorry, I hardly even scratched the surface. I hardly even said anything. But it actually could be a very exciting thing to spend some time doing. I don't know if I'm the sort of guy for it. I mean, ADHD, if you've got it, you need not apply. But for those who are extremely patient and want to keep track of all the details, this is the game for you. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I'll try to go into a little bit better detail next time. Have a good day.